London, 1976. Cold drizzle on the pavement, outside Piccadilly's Regent Theatre. A street musician strums "Can't Help Falling in Love" to an indifferent crowd. A black car slows. The door opens. A man in a white suit steps out and stops in the rain. Stick with this story, because what happened next turned an ordinary street corner into a memory for millions. And it proves one act of kindness can echo for decades. Rain ticked against the guitar's wooden body, each drop a cold sting on his fingers. It was just past 7 p.m. London. Winter of 1976. The pavement outside Piccadilly's Regent Theatre glistened under the dim street lamps. Show posters flapped weakly against the wind. A man in his mid-30s stood beneath the theater's overhang, but the drizzle still found him. His coat collar was turned up, his shoes were worn at the toes. His guitar case lay open at his feet. Inside, a handful of coins clinked when the wind shifted, mostly pennies, a few shillings. Beside them, in uneven black marker, a piece of cardboard read, "Trying to get home to see my mum." He adjusted his grip, wiped rain from his knuckles, and started strumming "Can't Help Falling in Love." His voice was steady, richer than you'd expect from a man busking in the cold. But his eyes scanned the faces drifting past. A couple slowed for half a verse, then kept walking. The hiss of passing buses drowned the softer notes. The air smelled of damp concrete and roasted chestnuts from a street vendor half a block away. Somewhere inside the theater lobby, the muffled sound of an orchestra warming up leaked through the heavy doors. A young boy, no more than 8, stopped to watch, tugging at his mother's sleeve. She pulled him along, her umbrella tilting to block the wind. The busker kept playing, but his left hand cramped from the cold. His pick slipped once, barely audible. Yet he winced like he'd dropped the whole rhythm. That's when headlights washed over him. A long black Cadillac Fleetwood slowed to a crawl on the slick street. The chrome bumper caught the theater's neon in a blur of red and gold. The busker's voice faltered for half a note. The Cadillac idled, steam rising from its exhaust. Then the passenger door opened. A gloved hand emerged first. White leather, perfectly fitted. The kind of glove you didn't see much on London street. A man stepped out, boots clicking on the wet pavement. The rain slid off the shoulders of a white high-collared jacket. His presence hit like a quiet shockwave. Not loud, but undeniable. The busker's right hand froze above the strings. The last chord faded into the street noise. For a second, the two men just looked at each other. The stranger's sunglasses reflected the glow from the Regent marquee. His jawline, familiar even in shadow, made the crowd's nearest bystanders blink twice. A couple across the street stopped mid-step. A cab driver leaned to see through the rain. The busker shifted, unsure if this was real or a cruel trick of the night. The man reached up slowly. He slid the sunglasses from his face, and even before anyone said a word, the busker knew exactly who he was looking at. It wasn't just the face, it was the way the air seemed to change. Like the street itself leaned in to listen. Elvis Presley stood on the curb in the London drizzle. The hiss of passing tires dulled. Even the neon buzz above the theater seemed quieter. People nearby froze mid-stride. One man dropped his cigarette without noticing. Elvis's white high-collared jacket caught every flicker of light. The drizzle made the fabric glow faintly under the street lamp. His black hair was slick from the rain, but not enough to dull the gravity of who he was. The busker's heart pounded so loud he could hear it over the hum of the city. Elvis nodded toward the guitar still hanging loose in the busker's hands. Without speaking, he tilted his head. An unspoken go. The busker blinked, swallowed hard, and picked out the next chord of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Elvis didn't join right away. He closed his eyes, swayed slightly to the rhythm, and let the music settle in. The crowd began to gather. First 3 people, then 10, A woman in a red scarf clutched her handbag to her chest and whispered to the stranger beside her, "It's him. It's really him." When Elvis opened his mouth, the sound was warm, effortless, and instantly familiar. His voice wrapped around the melody like it belonged there. The busker's harmonies were rougher, edges shaped by years of street singing, but together, their voices clicked in a way no one expected. By now 30 people ringed the scene, umbrellas tilted forward, faces leaned through the drizzle. A young couple locked arms and just listened. Phones didn't exist yet, but cameras did. A pair of American tourists, both wearing wide lapel coats, fumbled with a small film camera. One crouched to get them both in frame. Inside the Regent Theater lobby, an usher cracked the heavy door. The muffled brass of the orchestra warming up spilled out, mixing strangely with the street duet. The busker's voice wavered, not from the cold now but from disbelief. And then, Elvis did something no one saw coming. He stepped closer until their shoulders nearly touched. Leaning toward the guitar, his voice dropped into a lower register for the second verse. And for a moment, it felt less like a street performance, and more like two old friends trading lines in a dimly lit room. A teenager in the crowd cupped his hands and shouted, "Sing it, Elvis." Elvis just grinned without breaking the chord change. Rain pooled at the toe of Elvis's boots. A bead of water rolled off the busker's guitar onto the pavement. When they reached the chorus, Elvis's voice lifted again, full and ringing, the kind of sound that could stop 100 conversations mid-sentence. The song faded into its final note. The busker's pick trembled in his grip. The crowd stayed quiet, as if afraid to break whatever spell had just been cast. Elvis turned his head toward him, his expression unreadable. He leaned in close, one hand still resting lightly on the guitar neck, and in a low voice, just for the busker, Elvis said something the crowd couldn't hear. The busker barely had time to process the words before Elvis smiled. Quick, almost conspiratorial. Then he asked, softly, but clear enough for the front row of onlookers to hear, "Mind if I borrow her?" The busker loosened his grip. Elvis reached for the guitar, his gloved hand brushing cold rain-slick wood. He slipped the glove off, tucking it into his jacket pocket, and ran a sleeve over the strings to dry them. The crowd shifted forward, umbrellas jostling. A car horn blared somewhere up the street, but no one here turned. Elvis cradled the guitar like it was an old friend. His thumb brushed one low, warm note, then another. The sound was slower than the record, almost hesitant, like he was stretching out the space between chords so everyone could breathe it in. The busker's shoulders dropped. He stepped to the side, adding a quiet harmony on the third chord, his voice raw but steady. Some in the crowd would later say, you could hear the difference. Two worlds colliding in the same song, one voice known on every continent, the other known only to the people who'd passed this corner before. That's when a movement rippled at the front. A little girl, hair damp under a knitted cap, squeezed through legs and coats, until she stood just a foot from Elvis, clutched in her mittened hands a folded Regent Theater program. Elvis's eyes dropped to it, then to her face. Without missing a chord he knelt. Rain gathered on the shoulders of his jacket. The girl froze, wide-eyed. A woman, her mother, leaned down, murmuring something as she pulled a tissue from her pocket. She dabbed at her eyes without looking away. Elvis sang the next lines directly to the girl. His voice softened to something almost like a lullaby. The busker's harmony thinned to give him space. And then, Elvis did something no one expected. He reached up to his own neck and loosened the silk scarf knotted there, cream-colored, with a faint gold edge. He draped it carefully across the top of the guitar case in front of the busker, the fabric darkening in spots where the rain touched it. The busker glanced down and froze. The scarf wasn't empty. Folded inside were banknotes, several crisp 20, heavy enough to hold the fabric in place against the wind. Murmurs spread. Someone gasped. A man near the back muttered, "That's more than he's made all week." Another answered, "That's more than I've made all week." Elvis just kept playing, eyes back on the girl, letting the busker find his place again in the harmony. The scarf's fringe swayed slightly with the vibrations of the guitar. The rain smelled sharper now. Maybe just the way air feels when something important is happening. They reached the last chord together. The sound hung for a moment, mixing with the muffled brass still drifting from inside the theater. The busker's gaze locked on the scarf, the folded notes, then back to Elvis. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the last gift Elvis Presley would leave on that cold London street. The scarf lay across the busker's guitar case, rain beating on the silk. Inside, folded with deliberate care, were several crisp 20-paw notes, more than he'd earned in weeks. Gasps rippled through the semicircle of onlookers. A boy on his father's shoulders craned forward. An older man muttered under his breath, "That's rent and then some." The busker's throat tight. He almost forgot to strum the next chord. But Elvis kept the song moving, carrying the weight of the moment. They reached the closing line together, the busker's voice trembling but present. The last note rang out, and for a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, applause broke like a wave, loud enough to drown out the drizzle, loud enough that the theater's glass doors rattled. Elvis turned toward the crowd, his voice carried just enough to be heard over the clapping. "This man's got heart, take care of him." People shouted back, "Another song, one more." But Elvis shook his head with an easy grin. "Not tonight," he said, almost playful. He stepped close to the busker, resting a hand on his damp shoulder, leaning in so only he could hear. Elvis whispered, "Keep playing for." It was never clear who her meant. His mother, the little girl in the front, maybe even the music itself. The busker didn't ask. Elvis handed back the guitar, fingers tapping the worn wood once before he let go. He stepped off the curb toward the waiting Cadillac. The car's headlights caught in the rain, turning each drop into a brief spark. The door shut with a muted thunk. The engine's low rumble filled the street. As the car pulled away, its taillights shrinking to twin red dots in the fog, the busker stood frozen, scarf in hand. The silk was warm where Elvis had worn it, cool where the rain had touched. He unfolded it slightly, seeing the notes again, and quickly folded them back, almost protective. Around him, the crowd lingered, buzzing, replaying what they'd just witnessed. A few strangers dropped coins into his case, almost as if following Elvis's instructions. The smell of petrol hung faintly in the air from the Cadillac's departure. The rain had slowed to a mist, soft enough now that the neon from the theater marquee seemed to smear across the pavement. One man near the back of the dispersing crowd leaned toward his friend. "You won't believe where this ends up." The busker didn't hear him, but in less than a week, the whole world would. 4 days later, in a small London flat, a knock at the door pulled the busker from his chair. He wasn't expecting visitors, certainly not a story that had already begun to circle the globe. It had started with a single click of a camera shutter. One of the American tourists who'd been there that night had developed the film back home. In the center of the photo, Elvis Presley, in the rain, shoulder to shoulder with a soaked street musician. The image ran in a local London paper first. By morning, the editor's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Syndication requests came in from New York, Sydney, and Toronto. Radio DJs retold the story with their own embellishments. Some claimed Elvis had played 3 songs. Others swore he stayed nearly an hour. The truth, a single unforgettable performance didn't matter. What mattered was the way it made people feel. By the 3rd day, letters began arriving at the Regent Theatre, addressed only to the street singer with Elvis. Some contained coins taped to index cards. Others were pages of handwriting, stories from strangers about how they'd been inspired to keep playing, keep trying, keep believing. Then came the knock on the 4th day. A delivery man stood there holding a long, slim box, wrapped in brown paper. No return address, just the Regent Theatre's stamp across the corner. The busker set it on the table, slid a finger under the twine, and the paper fell away to reveal a hard guitar case, polished black with brass latches. Inside, nestled in soft red velvet, was a sunburst Gibson guitar. The finish gleamed, unmarked, as if it had been waiting in a shop window for the right pair of hands. On the neck rested an envelope. The handwriting was bold, Slanted. Unmistakable. You'll always have a seat in the front row. He ran a hand over the strings. Perfectly in tune. Friends would later say that from that day forward, his playing carried something new. Less hunger, more hope. According to his family, that Gibson never left his home for long. He played it on stage, at pubs, and in the quiet of his kitchen. Decades later, it's still in the family's care, still in tune, all from one rainy night when a man who didn't need to stop did. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a crowd. What's the most unforgettable act of generosity you've ever witnessed? Tell us below. Your story might inspire someone the way Elvis inspired him.